Hey, it's Ryan again. It's 2 a.m. here, East Coast, and I uh, I wanted to make this video. I woke up in the middle of the night and I was thinking about, you know, trying to offer a perspective on the things that that happened to me during my spiritual awakening, and one of the things that happened was I was able to essentially eliminate anxiety from my life nearly completely, and it's through no clinical or pharmaceutical means. Um, I'm a veteran, and I am technically a disabled veteran, and the um, the healthcare from the VA is just almost non-existent, especially mental health. There's no real way. So I would suffer from these debilitating mental health episodes where the anxiety was debilitating. I don't know if I've already used that word, but it is 100% what would happen, and it could take me out of normal functioning for 3, 4, sometimes an entire week, 3, 4 days, sometimes an entire week, and it would be it's just terrible. It was terrible, and I tried a lot of different ways to deal with the anxiety, all sorts of different ways. Um, None of which I'll get into, but it would be sufficient to say that none of them ever worked. Not once did it ever work that I was able to eliminate or even deal with, especially through CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, or whatever else the social worker there was able, because I've never been able to see a real doctor as far as a psychologist or a psychiatrist. They put me on a phone once with a psychiatrist, a psychologist. They put me on a phone with them, and they said, what is it that you need from us? And I was like, I need help because I feel like my mind is shredded. So fast forward to now, and because I have a completely different perspective on reality, I can now see what anxiety really is. And so I have mentioned in a previous video that I had found the work of Carl Jung, and I had found the Red Book. So just to round off this whole um, sequence of events is I've talked about I am a member of Alcoholics Anonymous because I am a recovering alcoholic, and nearly 10 years of sobriety, and I've learned a lot of things about myself and about the way that my mind works. So I've been doing this work for quite a while, and sorry, I'm itching a lot. It's mosquito bites. I sit out in my yard. I'm sorry, I sit out on my porch and I meditate and pray, and it's the time of the year we have mosquitoes. Anyway, I digress. The So when I started reading Carl Jung, when I started reading the Red Book, I started to come to a very, very clear understanding of what I had already experienced. So when I read the Red Book, the information that was in there had explained in great detail what actually happened to me. So I already knew, I had already experienced what the book was telling me, what had gone on. So, so my whole life, again, I've talked about this, the ego. My whole life, I had been constructing this persona that was Ryan, and it was all false, and it was all based on all these assumptions about life and about the way things should work and the way things that I think life works. Excuse me, and none of those things are true. So so as I went through this shedding, uh, the best way to explain it is like a shedding of all these layers and levels. um, as the light started to come through, I started to release the elements of my ego that were quite literally torturing me. um, because A Course in Miracles talks about um, A Course in Miracles talks about the ego being false and the ego being a construct of itself, essentially. And and there's a lot of literature out there. There's a lot of people that talk about, the shadow being the ego, the shadow, the being an essential aspect of your life. And I don't disagree with that. It was is a useful tool at some points to use, especially in our physical, in this 3D world. In the 3D world, an ego can be useful. And when you're in AA, you go through this process, the sixth and seventh step, and you identify character defects, and then you start asking God to remove them. So, but I never really understood, because there was no real reason for me to ever get rid of my character defects, because they served me in a lot of ways. Um, and I'll just take one example, is anger. And I always felt anger served me, because I thought anger was a clarifier. I thought anger, it helped me fortify myself against life's, um, the vicissitudes of life, the ups and downs. Like I was like, I'm angry, so I'm protected. In some way, I have no idea what that. I don't quite understand the rationale anymore about that, because the ego is telling you that it's totally fine to have these things in your life, only because they are constructs of the ego itself. So whenever I was angry at something, it was because it didn't jive with what I had constructed in my mind as being a position that I was going to hold. And I was going to hold that position forever. And it was never, and even if it changed into the opposite of the position that I had, it was still necessary to exist in my life. So I could hold diametrically opposed positions, so I was fortified against whatever argument came up. And in reality, none of that's real. All of those positions are all false. It's all false. There's no truth in any of it. And you can have a political position about something that exists in this dimension, like taxation, or how the government spends money, or the wars that your government gets involved in your name. And as a veteran, I have a very I'm keenly aware of these types of things, like what goes on in that. And so during that during the awakening, your my perspective shifted to where I was looking at the entirety. Like I was, so if I'm going to use this, if this was me and my ego during the awakening, what happens is that you become this. I became this entity. I don't know how else to say it. I'm just articulating it in a way that I understand it. You become this a separate entity, which I now know is awareness, or your higher level of consciousness. And I can look down or down in whatever direction, if I'm over here, spatially, it doesn't matter. But I can look and see what the ego is all, what those positions are. And it's just this swirling darkness of bullshit. Like it doesn't make any sense. And so as I was having this awareness now of what this was, the ego started to have less and less power over me. And so Eckhart Tolle talks about this. Like, that is one of the quintessential um, ideas of what he talks about in being present and raising your awareness, your consciousness. And so as I was able to rise above my that the ego aspect and see that what it was all about, that it was all false, that there was no truth. There was no truth. There's no there's no God in the ego. God, I created it. I believe I believe sincerely that I am a projection of God's will on this planet. And so, or a soul, or whatever you want to call it, I'm an aspect of the essence of all that is. And so, as I'm able to separate myself from the ego, which is trying to kill me through its self-preservation, which is what it is, the ego is trying to end me. It's trying to conceal the true nature of who I am, that what comes the what is inside of me, what is the essence of who I am. I was able to look and see every aspect of my anxiety for what it is, and it's all false. And so in a lot of ways I had already known that. I had already known that it was false, but because I had no context for what reality really is, so because I had no context for what reality is, I didn't have any way to put it into perspective. So, you know, so now as I'm not saying that I don't have moments where I have anxiety, anxiousness inside of me. And that's another something else that I like Eckhart Tolle. I'm not gonna I'm a big fan. Let's say I'm a big fan of him. So and I'm not gonna call him ET because he's already short, and it's already a thing where I'm not gonna he's not ET, Eckhart Tolle. So anyway, the as I'm able to observe my the ego and the consciousness from an elevated space, and I am able to expand my inner space on the inside consciously. Those anxious thoughts, which are just thoughts, so they're thoughts of ideas of future memories. This is how I'm going. This is how I look at it now. Um, you have a thought. This is my translation of this situation. One would have a thought. I would have a thought, and again, we do that idea that thought, the electromagnetic. So I have the thought, I wrap the emotion around it, um, and it exists in my world, but it's a memory of it's a thought, and then I have it, and then it goes away. This is what used to happen. It would go away, but then it would come back. So now it's a memory of a thought. So now I'm having a memory of something that never existed in the first place, and in that way now I'm generating more memories of a thought of something that never existed. So that thought was future tripping about something that was going to happen, and it became, I birthed that thought, and now it became a memory. If it makes total sense to me. I mean, you know, drop a comment, or you put a comment and tell me if that makes sense to you. Because I need to know that, I mean, it makes sense to me anyway. I'm not crazy. So hopefully. And the so anyway, as I have these memories of a future that never happened, I would dwell on those memories. and then it would basically disable me from being anything productive in the world. So now what happens is that thought can come, and it will come. All thoughts have agency in that they can arrive, and it's described as a cloud. It can be described as a cloud. I see it as that thought as being something like a cloud, like an idea that's just a thought that comes in, and I have a choice now that I can witness that thought from a raised awareness, a raised consciousness. I can look down on that thought or at that thought and say, that's an interesting thing. And, you know, what kind of credence am I going to give that thought? And then I don't. I don't give it any credence because it's not real. And because I have an understanding of reality and I have an understanding of what my thoughts really are, and that is my ego kind of forcing itself onto me. Still, it returns. It will return. I don't know that it'll ever not return. But it's just dealing with it is the what happens now. I'm able to deal with it. So as I observe that thought, I can say that's not real. And so even though I might feel anxious in a moment, I don't I don't have to create that. I don't have to engineer that motor anymore. I don't have to give birth to that that thought process. And so that's how I deal with anxiety now is I don't have it because I don't give it any energy. So I don't power the motor, you know, thought, emotion, I don't wind that motor. If you understand how motors work, electromagnetic motors, is I don't need to wind that motor anymore. I might get a couple winds on it and then I get and then I realize no, that's not a real thing. You don't need that in your life. It's I say you, I mean me. So you, me. So I don't need that shit anymore. And it's not real. So I mean, I hope this helps somebody because though that anxiety, it's not a real thing. Now you can be clinically depressed. I'm not a doctor. I'm not saying go off your meds. I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying stop seeing psychiatrists and psychologists. All of those things are useful tools. All of them are useful tools. And again, I'm not a doctor. I don't have any opinion on that. I'm saying for me, once I had that awareness, I no longer needed. I no longer need in those moments where the severe anxiety comes in or would have come in. That cycle has been disrupted. There's no other way to explain it. That I'm able to see it, acknowledge it, and let that thought go by, and then let it dissipate into the ether of the space inside of my head, and inside the space of my being, for lack of a better way to phrase it. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that's helpful to somebody, um, because um, it's just what I thought about. I woke up. It was almost 2 in the morning, and and that's what I wanted to convey. It needed to be recorded for me. So I hope somebody got something out of it. I love you. Take care of yourself. All right, and we'll see you next time.